Hello, everyone. Welcome, one and all. This is the Dissidence podcast. My name is Keaton Weiss, and I am here with a friend of the show, the host of the Howl Underground on YouTube and the Revolution or Bust podcast, which is available on all podcast players. I recommend you subscribe to both of those programs. Mr. Alan Howell. Alan, hello again.
Good morning. Thank you for the warm invitation.
Oh, of course. Well, this was actually your invitation to me to come back on your show. So let me just set this up here. We did a show on your channel about a week or so back about the sort of difference between direct action and the electoral strategies. I think that's a fair way to sort of summarize that show that we did. I think my thesis was that this election, from our point of view, is pretty much lost, and that we ought to de-emphasize people's voting strategies and put more emphasis on direct action campaigns, both now and after November and after January, no matter who wins this farce of a race. And so that's my thesis, basically. We seem to be in somewhat agreement that day. And then I wrote a piece to sort of follow up on that show, and you seem to have some different thoughts now. So I gave my very, very brief thesis there. So why don't you tell me what some of your issues are, and then I'll go sort of more in depth, and then we'll go from there.
You noticed I did a piece on Vosh, and that was, you liked that one. And,
I did.
And I feel like some of the criticisms I have of Vosh, who is a blatant sheepdog, partially, a little bit, apply to what I was trying to say after our discussion. After I read your article, it was almost like I could see where our discussion was meant to set up the article and to gain in advance some pre-approval for the idea. So when you first began to publicly express support for Bernie or Bust, and you weren't always willing to do that, but when you first began to do that, you addressed a group of people whom you described as progressives who didn't understand the desperation of the Rust Belt swing voters. You were writing, and I can't remember which article it was, to help these progressives feel more comfortable with the idea of Bernie or Bust. You were trying to help...
No, wait, hold on. Let me just sort of put a flag in the ground there. When we're trying to win a primary, my goal is to get votes, right? So when I talk about people who don't feel empathy with people in the Rust Belt, right? When I talk about people who I don't particularly like and don't particularly want in the club, if there is a date on the calendar on which they're going to have to go to the polls and vote for somebody, and I have one of these assholes on the phone because I did some phone banking for the Bernie campaign, I'm going to try to get the vote, right? I don't want to leave votes on the table. But I am not categorizing those people as progressives. I just want to be clear about that. So it's not that I wasn't trying to win votes for the Bernie campaign. I was. Every phone call I had, my goal was to get that vote, right? And sometimes I had a progressive on the phone, and sometimes I had a douchebag on the phone. But douchebags' votes count just as much as progressive votes. Now that the election is lost, the strategy is different, right?
Yeah. Now,
so anyway.
Yeah, now the context is more Nick Branya and the movement for a People's Party and coalition building. So I think
the reason I posted in that forum is because one of the reasons that I was inspired to write the piece, and one of the reasons why I was inspired to take the position that I did, is because I interviewed Nick 1 year ago. It's not because I'm out shilling for the People's Party. I am listed as an endorser of theirs on their website, which I'm very happy about and very honored about. But beyond that, this was not specifically organized to get people to sign up for MPP. I think it's a good idea. I recommend people look at them further, but that's why I posted that in that forum.
Yeah. So when Nick was talking to you about it, he was saying, don't even worry about how people want to vote. Don't even worry if they're holding their noses and voting for corporatists. And he said it isn't worth worrying about because voting doesn't do that much anyway. And that's sort of where we left our discussion on my show last time. And so in this more recent piece that you wrote, I think you were trying to help progressives, people you would call progressives, understand this same maybe angst that Bernie or Busters have felt all along without, I think you're trying to help them understand without putting them off. Kind of the way you were doing with the douchebags, but not as much.
Okay, all right, that's fair enough.
And the DNC has been doing the same thing for years. They want to help the comfy people feel as though they are the backbone of the party. You don't want that. I know you don't want the comfy people to be the backbone, but you don't want to exclude them either. And to be truthful,
no, I do want to exclude. I do want to exclude them now that the election is lost.
What does Nick think?
There's a difference.
Do you think Nick also wants to exclude them, or do you think he wants them to be part of his coalition? The comfy people.
I couldn't speak for Nick, but when it comes to that voting strategy, what I think his answer meant was that he is not willing to drive a wedge through the coalition and say that if you have to choose between two absolutely horrible candidates, that whichever horrible candidate you choose between those two is not going to determine whether or not you're welcome in the People's Party. Do I think Nick is targeting comfy wine track liberals with no empathy for the working poor? No, I do not.
Yeah, that's fair. So if you're comparing the DNC to somebody like Cenk Uygur, and then keep going because we think he's funded by Jeffrey Katzenberg, so we think he's controlled opposition. But if you keep going left, actually people who actually feel empathy for the working poor, they still, on their Patreon list, they still have a lot of people who are comfortable. Their audiences are comprised of a lot of people who are comfortable. And a lot of the grubby people would never be a Patreon patron, but they also would not be as likely to even find the podcast in the first place. So some of the people don't work hard enough to cater to the working poor as an audience. And I want to say this gently, but I feel like you may be somewhere that, you're erudite. You and your team have excellent academic credentials, all of the people who write. And
I'm a college dropout, by the way, just so you know.
Well, you have no trouble rubbing shoulders with, I don't think Russell's a college dropout.
No, but Russell was a high school dropout who got his GED and then went to college after.
You both have
and drove a horse and carriage in Central Park and saved money through doing that back when you can do that and make a living at it, and opened a couple of off-Broadway theaters in New York, and now he works as a tour guide. So we're not professional managerial class people here. I could promise you that.
I'm just.
You want a tour of my house? I'll prove it to you.
No, that's incredibly relevant, and I'm really glad you said it. I would have been happy to stop everything and let you say that right there because we're not arm wrestling each other here. I think that's absolutely relevant, and I'm insanely interested in what he did with the off Broadway. That's off topic, but if we were having a normal conversation, I'd say, well, tell me about that.
Well, we'll have you on again, I'm sure. We got to do a show with the three of us someday.
Yeah, I'm insanely interested in what he did there. And I think he's just an amazing person. So I love his perspective because he doesn't come across as condescending. He's not a sneering, snarling, condescending person. But my point was that you all have no trouble dissecting Wall Street Journal articles. You have no trouble with Washington Post articles, which are written, if you admit it, at a higher level of reading comprehension than a lot of the grubby populists have. Not everyone in this movement, not everyone in the Poor People's Marches type and Black Lives Matter type movement that truly feel the desperation of being evicted right now and all that, they're not all aware of what's going on with the Wall Street Journal. But your crew is, and your crew unpacks those articles in a way that shows that you're at least an amphibian. You may not be a comfy, erudite, college-educated, but you have all the academic and all the intellectual.
Right. Well, what you're saying
chops.
is that we're much smarter than most of those people, and I would agree with that.
Yeah, and that comes through in your writing and in your speaking. Because of this, you are able to meet the Wall Street Journal type writers where they are and expose them for what they are. That's the gift that you bring. That's the dual nature of your background, and me too. I have similar stories to you. Growing up in the West, in the Pacific Northwest as a logger, gave me some of those same bona fides as a grubby populist. In short, you're able to swim in the waters of erudite elitism as well as in the waters of grubby populism. But, in all caps, when push comes to shove, do you and all the other lefty independent journalists, do we all fight harder to appease the comfy people and keep them invested in the movement and in our Patreon channels? And no. That's the central question. Good. The answer is no. And I believe that. Or do you work harder to make sure that the coalition you seek to build never sells out and neglects the working poor? Because your audience has more comfy people perhaps than not so comfy people. And I'd say that your tendency may, if you do tend toward appeasement rather than an unflinching stance regarding justice, that would be to say that we don't need to hold people accountable if they're voting for corporatists. And I'd say this is the tendency of every lefty pundit. Jimmy Dore, he's always ranting and railing about all the supposed lefty pundits who won't call out Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the squad, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Pramila Jayapal. He's always saying, look, they're not getting the job done. Where are all you true lefty pundits? You should all be calling them out. I'm calling them out. Where is everyone else? And he says, there is no one else. And that may be a little bit too harsh. But all of them are guilty of, except maybe Jimmy, are guilty of some level of sheepdogging. Or at least, in Jimmy Dore's case, he looks the other way when his friends are guilty of it. He would never let us...
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, he would never let us come on his show and call out Tulsi or Cenk. And Cenk is the biggest sheepdog in history. So the bottom line, so even Jimmy has that complicity, whatever. He's complicit with some big name sheepdogs. So the bottom line is our raison d'etre to build and maintain a large audience of the type of people who typically follow politics, which, if you're thinking about from Nick Branya's point of view, maybe that is important. Like, we don't want to just talk to the air. We don't want to talk to 12 people and say relentlessly what's, the truth. Jimmy has a big audience, and he thinks he's relentlessly telling the truth. So he's probably an exception.
Sorry.
So the last thing is, do we want to insist on the eventual total eradication of corporatism without pragmatic / incrementalist going along to getting along, that type of thinking, getting in the way? And what we've both seen is that sometimes it does get in the way.
Sure thing. Okay, so let me just say two very, very quick things about the Young Turks and Nick Brana and the Movement for a People's Party. The Young Turks is the biggest online news show in the world, and there's no doubt that Cenk Uygur is first and foremost a businessman. He is a self-described capitalist, right? He considers himself a hustler, a go-getter, an empire builder. You could tell from his ego, right? I mean, his goal is to dominate, right? I mean, it's all everything, the physicality, the temperament, just the way he's built that network. And so the way he's doing that is, yes, he is sort of sleazily, much of the time, towing the line between the Bernie crowd and the Warren crowd, and even the more just broader sort of liberal tent come general election time, right?
Right.
You've listened to just about all our shows. Tell me when I've ever done that.
Yeah.
I mean, never.
But you do have to resist that. I mean, we all have to resist that urge.
Okay, now, when it comes to Nick has a resume. He worked for Terry McAuliffe. He worked for John Kerry. He worked for Barack Obama. He worked for Bernie Sanders. He was offered a paid gig on the Bernie Sanders campaign this time, and he chose not to take it. If he were interested in building a brand for himself and maximizing his audience, right, for some sort of ulterior motive, there are a million ways he could do that with his resume that don't involve starting a third party out of nowhere, right? I mean, so I don't have any reason whatsoever to question his motives.
Me too. Me too. I agree. Very,
okay.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, so on the question of do we hold people accountable to voting for corporatists, The answer is yes, we do. The question is, how do we hold them accountable for voting for corporatists? Do we say that if you vote, if you are one of the people in the background, that's why I picked that backdrop for my piece. If you're one of those people who's out there, they look like they're occupying some building somewhere, right? Not getting a permit on a Saturday, knitting a pussy hat and putting it on their head, and going to Starbucks and going to Grand Central and taking the train back up to the suburbs, right? They're doing real shit there. If a few of those people voted for Joe Biden, the way we hold them to account is not saying you're a worthless piece of shit for voting for Joe Biden. The way we hold them to account is insisting that they keep doing what they're doing, right? They keep occupying buildings, organizing walkouts, strikes, right? Massive nonviolent direct action to apply maximum pressure, not to Joe Biden. We're not going to move Joe Biden to the left. Anybody who says we're going to move Joe Biden to the left is either lying or naive. You don't move Joe Biden anywhere. You do the opposite. You hold Joe Biden down and you torture him, right? Figuratively, obviously, non-violently. It's a Braveheart situation, right? Where you got him down and you apply maximum pressure to the system that this system will not function, no matter who the president is, unless our demands are met. That's how you hold people to account for voting for Joe Biden, not by pushing them out of the movement. If you're pushing them out of the movement, then they're not going to be there. Good. They're not going to march with you. They're not going to strike. They're not going to do it. They're going to say, okay, well, this populist left movement is not for me. They don't want me. They told me to fuck off. They called me a scab. They called me a sheepdog, right? They called me an asshole. And so I have no place there. And I think that would be a fatal error, because there's nothing to win in this election anymore. This is what I keep trying to stress. The election is fucking over. It's done. We lost. So that's why I use the analogy that to keep pushing this to the point where you're going to get people so discouraged that they're not going to protest the Joe Biden presidency is to throw good money after bad money. We're trying to salvage something from an election that cannot be salvaged.
Yeah, the election isn't the point, but the principles still matter.
Sure, but the way you hold people to account for voting for a piece of shit like Joe Biden is by making them promise you and holding them to that promise that they're going to be there pressuring not Joe Biden, not moving Joe Biden. See, moving Joe Biden to the left looks like this. Hey, Joe, we voted for you, and so we really want something for it, and we're going to hold your feet to the fire. Otherwise, we're not going to vote for you again, although we probably will, because the Republicans are always going to be a little worse. And so what we're really just doing is we're really just pounding our chest and asking nicely, hey, can you please give us a public option?
That was good. That was really good.
But that's not the same thing as general strikes, teacher strikes, nurses strikes, student walkouts, sit-ins at all of your congressperson's office, senator's offices. That's what has to happen. Now, you want me to get really red pill with you here. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think this country has it in it to do that. I think the country is too beaten down. They are desensitized. They're apathetic. I think they're resigned to a shit life in a shit country. I think that's why Donald Trump won in the first place. It's why I think he very well might win again. We see the polls are starting to tighten now. And so I don't think this is going to come together. I'm not trying to sell people any false hope. I'm also not trying to depress people. I'm just keeping it real with you. But that's the only hope there is. And I know you know that.
Let me put a little flag in there. Just a caveat, because what you say is true under the conditions we've had over the last 40 years. No denying, no rebuttal. There's no point I could make, or a series of points I could make to rebut what you just said under the circumstances of the last 40 years. But with the COVID crisis and with the eruption of the Black Lives Matter movement and with evictions, mass evictions, if the unemployment insurance stopped, and probably nobody's that stupid. It probably isn't just going to stop. Even the Republicans.
Well, it has stopped.
But but over time, if it remained as it is stopped, there would be enough turmoil. There would be enough desperation that what you just said would probably become not true. That there would be enough people, desperate people, and they may not know what to demand. They may not know. They may not be organized enough to form a union or anything like that, but they can wildcat strike and they can protest and they can do all those other things. And a critical mass.
So hold on, let me just
a tipping
pause
point.
you for a second.
You get to a tipping point that we're closer to than a lot of people realize. We're in the Depression era kind of economic situation, and it's going to get worse.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons, that is the ray of hope. That's why I said in the article that the ray of hope is the BLM movement, is these protests, right? And so that's why I'm saying it's not impossible. If this didn't happen, right, let's say there were no COVID crisis and the Democrats just lined up behind Joe Biden, okay, and we had a Biden versus Trump race, which, by the way, this would all be moved because Biden would be getting blown out if that were the case. We all know that, right? But if that were the case, I'd be 100% with you, right? Because there'd be no crisis, there'd be no grassroots energy. This would just be another just sham of a race with no popular movement behind it. Bernie is going to do what he's going to do. He's going to cave and he's going to, talk about what good friends he is with Joe Biden. At that point, I'd be 100% on the page of no, you have to hold the line in terms of voting because there's nothing else going on. Now we have an opportunity here to build this movement beyond electoral politics. And we shouldn't make electoral decisions the litmus test as to who is welcome in that movement and who is not. If somebody's willing to form a wildcat strike, why should I care? Or, let me rephrase that. It's not that I shouldn't care that they voted for Joe Biden, right? Because I'm not voting for Joe Biden. But am I willing to tell them, hey, don't bother showing up to this wildcat strike because you voted for Joe Biden, therefore I can't trust you? To me, that's unreasonable and it's counterproductive. And so that's where I'm coming from. I'm not saying you have to agree with people's decisions on voting. I'm just willing to say that if you're out there protesting, if you're out there, like I said, there was the woman who I interviewed on my show a couple of weeks back. She's been out in 25 of these Black Lives Matter protests. The last one, she put her body between one of these Nazi pig, back to blue, scumbags and one of her comrades. And she took a punch right to the face, punched her fucking nose in, broke it. Am I going to tell her that she's not a real progressive if she feels like she must vote for Joe Biden in a choice between him and Donald Trump? Because to me, that would be dumb because if she's willing to be out there, we're going to need her out there after the election, no matter what. And you know where I'm coming from. Here, go ahead. I'll let you sort of give an answer to that, and then I'll back this up a little bit because I just want to put things in a context here. But go ahead.
Okay, so eventually I want to say two things, but the one thing I want to say about
go ahead, say what you have to say, and then I'll go because I'm going to go on for a while when I I get a chance again. So say what you got to say.
Okay, so you've got this woman, and she's out there to fight, in my view, the way you've described her, to fight racial injustice, and I would say that the true coalition eventually will be there to fight economic injustice. And so if somebody is willing to fight racial injustice, like Nike is, and other big corporations, they're willing to fight for the truth that Black lives matter. But I don't know that they all think poor lives matter. And so the coalition eventually has to be solidified. And the danger, if you're forming a coalition, like eventually, or back in history sometime, the DNC formed. And over the years, it changed. It changed drastically from a more populist party to a more elitist party. And over that time, part of the reason, and it isn't saying that voting mattered more then than it does now, and maybe it didn't, but the people who voted based on their values, based on their priorities. So if you're voting, you're endorsing, really, the people for whom you vote. So if you're endorsing corporatists with your vote, it shows where you are. It shows that you're more interested in going along to getting along and being pragmatic and making deals than actually standing up for economic injustice. So the true bona fides are going to come down to, are we willing to fight for the bottom half of the economic ladder. So going forward, if Nick Brana says, this is the second point, Brana says that he is trying to build a coalition of people that will fight economic injustice. And if he caters over the years to the people that the DNC has tried to bring in, eventually we're just going to have another group of people that look like the douchebags we have now, the comfy suburban Democrats, the wine track Democrats that we've been fighting this time around, the people that are absolutely not willing to use electoral leverage even, and certainly not willing to pile into the streets. So this woman, she has some credentials, she has some credibility, but eventually I think the conclusion is we can't afford to keep making pragmatic compromises with the comfy crowd over the years going forward, even if the numbers of viewers and listeners for our media increase, which is the biggest danger for pundits, not necessarily for politicians. And that's the main point I wanted to make. I wanted to say that the way we vote does matter, because it really shows where we are in the class war. It shows if we're more comfy and identify with the comfortable, or if we identify, even if we're comfortable. I mean, even comfortable people can have their heart more like where this woman you mentioned has it, which is with the bottom half. And that's what a true leftist has always looked like. Somebody
Right.
who identifies with the workers, with the peasants, with the proletariat. That's what leftism has always meant. So things are really topsy-turvy now with a right-wing party like the Democrat Party calling itself progressive or leftist. It's certainly not.
Sure thing. Okay, is that your piece? I want to make sure you get everything you
Those are the
had
two
to
points I
say.
most wanted to make in rebuttal to our discussion about your most recent piece.
Okay, so the woman I'm talking about, who I interviewed, I don't know her very well. That's the only time I ever talked to her. So I don't know much about her. I'm not going to speak for her. In terms of, this question of caring about racial justice versus economic justice, people who are holding signs and who are advocating, as she did on this show, for defunding the police, that is beyond a racial justice demand. That is actually an explicitly socialist demand. Socialists have been railing about this issue for decades. Socialists consider cops to be the gatekeepers of the corporate and capitalist state. They do the bidding of landlords. They help enable gentrification, which forces poor and working class people out of their neighborhoods, right? They are the enforcers of, first and foremost, more than anything, property rights. And that includes the war on drugs, because that's how the capitalist state gets all its free labor, by locking up people, mostly black and brown people, but some white people also, for drug crimes. That is how they protect monopolies of legalized drugs, right?
Yep.
Like cigarettes and alcohol, right? By cracking down on people who do the unsanctioned drugs, right? So defunding the cops is a class conscious message. You're not advocating for defunding the police if you don't have a certain solidarity with poor and working class people. That's what makes this incarnation of the Black Lives Matter movement so much more inspiring than even the previous incarnations of it, right? Because now there is an unmistakable Marxist, socialist class component to it.
Yeah, good.
On the point of making deals, right? Well, we're voting for Biden because we're going to make a deal with Biden. No, we're not making deals with anybody. Voting for Biden has nothing to do with making deals with him. Like I said, it's that Braveheart thing, right? Where you're going to torture this system to the point where it will break if our demands are not met. And there are a lot of people, and I count myself in this category as well, as thinking that because of the composition of the Democratic Party, right? Not so much on the leadership side, right? They're ivory tower. They don't give a fuck about us any more than the goddamn, GOP does. But on the voter side, right? Their support comes from people who are invested in the system. Wine track moms, right? Upper middle class, professional managerial class people are invested in the system. They need the trains to run on time. They need the Uber drivers to drive them to the wine bar and to the art house movie theater, right? They need the bus boys to clean up after them at their favorite tapas restaurants, right? They need the museums, right? That's their culture. Right? The right-wing basis culture, these are like apocalyptic fucking like survivalist whack jobs to begin with. They're not as invested in this. And so if you have Joe Biden down on that table, right? And, you know, the scene at the end of Braveheart where he says, kiss the ring and it'll all stop. Kiss the ring. Joe Biden's much more likely to kiss that ring than, say, Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell's the kind of guy, because of the composition of his voter base, he's the kind of guy who will do the freedom, you know, he'll yell freedom and just keep it going, let it all crash and burn. So that's where I think, and again, I'm not speaking for her, but her politics seem to be very similar to mine when I was interviewing her. So that's where I would say she's coming from if she's voting for Biden, which I don't even know, like I said. All right. Third, on the point of electoral leverage, I'm sorry, you can't have electoral leverage over a party that doesn't care if they lose. This party does not care if they lose. It just came out over the weekend that Barack Obama, I think you shared this piece, expressed concerns that Joe Biden is liable to fuck things up, right? And that's not a new revelation. He's known for years. I mean, not just this cycle, dating back 5 years. He has known forever that Joe Biden is a horrible candidate. And yet he still made that emergency phone call to Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar to drop out and endorse him so they can crush Bernie Sanders. And so this is a party that would rather elect Donald Trump than actually do what's right for the people. So how do we enact electoral leverage over them? I don't think we can. Fourth, on the point of pragmatism, okay, the reason I'm against the use of pragmatism as it is described by corporate Democrats is because what they call pragmatism is not actually pragmatism. What they call pragmatism is resignation to corporatism. Yeah. Pragmatism as a strategy to actually build left power is not a bad thing. I am not an anti-pragmatist. I'm just against the co-optation of that term by sinister people and sinister organizations like the DNC to throw that word out as a way to convince people that we can't have things like tuition-free college or Medicare for all or things like that. In terms of being strategic to build left power and wield it on behalf of the people, I'm actually for that. Okay, so let me just take this back. My wife got a letter yesterday or the day before from the Department of, I think it was, it had to be the U.S. Education Department. It was a loan, settlement thing. She's applying to, get a payment plan for her federal student loans. They sent her a letter that said, here's our offer. You borrowed $29,000 in federal loans to go to a private college. She did not grow up in a rich family. The reason she was able to afford to go to that college is because she got the loans, right? Yeah. And they said, here's our offer to you. You can pay $200 a month for the next 240 months. Our offer to you is you can pay $200 a month until you turn 54 years old. She turned 34 yesterday. All right. That is our offer. And the final amount that you're going to be paying after all that is $48,000. You borrowed $29,000. We are offering you the opportunity to pay that off in 20 years. You're paying back a total of $48,000 on a $29,000 loan. Okay. Now, she actually has it better than a lot of people because thankfully we were able to start paying off her private loans, which are the ones that really fuck you, where you have these outrageous things where like you borrow 40, you pay back 50 and you still owe 60, right? Thankfully, we were able to start paying those off 5 years ago. So we're actually in a better spot than somebody who's in that dire a circumstance when it comes to paying off their loans. Okay. Now, these people, and my wife is right in this age range. Okay. They graduated college in 2008 when the recession hit. Right. And they took these loans out because their guidance counselor said, oh, yeah, take it, whatever. You'll be able to get a job. You'll pay it back in no time. Fine. They graduate into a destroyed economic landscape. That year is an election year where they happened to get active, and young people were the ones who pushed Barack Obama over the finish line in a very unlikely fashion in the primary against Hillary Clinton. They take him into the presidency. He's running on hope and change and take control of your future, right? And where, I'm gonna, help you, right? We're gonna fix all these wars. We're gonna fix the tanked, Bush era, recession. They say, okay, they get involved. They push him over the top. Young people, the young people who graduated with that debt. He does nothing. 8 years go by. All they get out of it is Mitt Romney's healthcare plan. This guy's a total con artist, a total swindler, a total fake, right? And so in 2016, at the end of that disappointment, Hillary Clinton's going to run again. We think, oh, fuck. Well, now this is who we rejected last time. He was a disappointment. Now we're getting the person who he ran against in 2008. And there's nobody in the Democratic Party stepping up to, stop her. Out of nowhere, out of thin air, this guy who no one's ever heard of before, Bernie Sanders, says, I'm running for president. He puts forth a message of real hope and real change, tangible promises, tangible policy goals, right? They rally behind him. These young people get behind him, right, in overwhelming numbers, but it's not enough. The DNC goes to the point of cheating to make sure that she is the nominee. This woman who, by the way, it was just, the first woman president, it was just found out in court documents that her husband partied with underage girls on Jeffrey Epstein's island. He's speaking at the DNC this week, right? This is who they were willing, this is who they insisted had to be the standard bearer for the party. Fuck the young people. They're out. Okay. She is so unbelievably horrible that she loses the presidency to a literal sideshow freak named Donald Trump. 100 years ago, they would charge admission just to see a guy like Donald Trump. He'd be in a cage, in a tent somewhere, and you'd have to pay, $5 silver to get in. She loses to him. So now we got Trump. Okay, now, 2020, Bernie's going to run again, this time as a front runner from the gate. He gets 1 million people signed up to volunteer for him in the first week. He gets 1 million donors right out of the bat, right? We take charge, right? We're on the path, right? And we have major setbacks. He has a fucking heart attack and almost dies, right? AOC endorses him on his hospital bed, revives the campaign from the dead, right? Brings us back. And now we're winning. We win the first 3 states, which is something that no candidate from either political party has ever done in the modern era. We are on the doorstep to victory. This time we're finally, after the Bush recession, after 8 years of Obama, after having the nomination taken from us last time, we're finally 12 years into this hell. We're going to win. And a day before the fucking thing happens, Barack Obama, the guy who we invested our hopes in 12 years ago, calls Pete Buttigieg, calls Amy Klobuchar, rallies the entire party behind this loser, Joe Biden, and the morons in the Democratic Party vote for him. And we're fucked again. And not only is Bernie fucked, but the people who took those loans out are fucked, because Bernie was going to cancel that debt. Not only was he going to cancel that debt, he was going to cancel medical debt, and he was going to get Medicare for all. These are 3 things that are taken for granted throughout the entire Western world. There's no such thing as medical debt in Europe because healthcare is free in Europe. They don't have student debt crises like this all over the world because they have tuition-free public college in most of the Western world. So these are very modest things that we've been after for 12 years, and we finally were right on the doorstep of winning them. And this party intervenes on behalf of the guy who they know is a loser. They know he's a loser. And so do people in those shoes, not just my wife's shoes, but like I said, the people who have those loans, have that medical debt, can't afford healthcare in the first place, do they have every right in the world to say, how dare you even ask me to vote for Joe Biden? Never mind tell me I have some moral obligation to vote for Joe Biden? Fuck you where you breathe. Don't even ask me to vote for Joe Biden. Of course, they have every right in the world to say that. And I'm with them on that, right? And so that is how committed I am, right, to this call. I am not voting for Joe Biden. It is a disgrace that these people would lecture these young people into sucking it up after 12 years where they have failed them at every single level. Now we're going to vote for Joe Biden. Why? Because you don't like Donald Trump? Fuck you. No way, no deal. That brings us to March 4th, day after Super Tuesday. A week later, a plague falls upon the country, right? Now we're in lockdown. Now the economy is in shambles, right? Now, but by then it's too late, right? Because even though the circumstances are such that now Bernie Sanders' platform makes a lot of sense, Biden has already taken a lead. He's already seized the race. A month later, Bernie drops out. Okay, now we're really fucked, right? I mean, now we are totally fucked. Now we can't leave our houses. We can't go to work. We're relying on unemployment. We have a president who is not even willing to acknowledge the severity of this thing. What the fuck is going to happen now? And we have a race now between him and Joe Biden. And then 6 weeks after that, some Nazi pig in Minneapolis crushes George Floyd's windpipe under his kneecap. And now we have, in response to that, and also in response to the lockdown and the crisis and everything else, just this outpouring of rage from the grassroots, saying that we are not going to take this shit anymore. We're not just going to come out here telling the cops not to mistreat black people anymore, not to kill black people. No, we're taking it a step further. Now we're saying defund the police, which is, like I said before, an explicitly socialist goal. And so if you have people in that movement right now who are saying, look, I am with you here. I myself struggle with medical debt. I myself cannot afford health care. I myself am drowning in student loan bills, right? But because of where we are right now, I have a kid who I have to send to school in 2 weeks, right? September is right around the corner. Not only is the Trump White House willing to send them back to school in an unsafe environment, but they are insisting that school districts reopen despite not giving them any safety guidelines whatsoever. Betsy DeVos goes on TV and basically just says, look it up, Google it. Google how you're going to send people back safely. And so if they come to you and they say, listen, I am in the same boat as you here, and I am out here protesting dozens of times, getting punched in the face by these people, and I am going to be out there after November, after January, no matter who wins this goddamn thing, right?
Good.
But I have a child who I have to send to school. And the fact of the matter is, this administration is not willing to even lift a finger to make that school safe. And I'm not going to send them into a school where they're going to come back with a deadly illness and give it to me and give it to my family. And so what I need you to do is I need you to give me the space to vote for Joe Biden, who might, and I'm not even saying he will, who might implement the bare minimum of safety measures, right? Or safety guidelines to reopen these schools. But I promise you, I will be out there every single day, not doing bullshit. I will be out there occupying buildings, organizing student walkouts, teach-ins on Medicare for all, sit-in protests at all these Congress people's offices. I'll be out there in the streets. We're going to have Medicare for all marches. We'll be organizing strikes. We'll be exerting maximum pressure to this system.
All right.
I do not agree with them. I'm not saying I agree with them. What I'm saying is I'm going to say, okay, fine. Go ahead. Vote for who you want, but you better be out there. And if I trust them to be out there, then I trust them.
Take pity on my poor memory, because I'm going to forget. I just take pity and then go right back into it. But what percentage of people? Because I didn't know this. You don't even know that this woman is even considering a vote for Biden. What percentage of people are that progressive, and also swilling the corporate Kool-Aid to the extent that they actually could vote for Joe Biden? Are you thinking there are lots and lots of people in this category and we have to make sure that the door is open for them? I would say there are hardly any people that are as willing as this woman is, and have swallowed the corporate Kool-Aid to the extent that they really think they should be able to. Because people who are voting the way you just said are afraid, and you have to admit they're misinformed. If they really knew what you know, they wouldn't fall for that. There's nobody who has enough information who would fall for that. So I'd say there are very few people in that category. I mean, because the fear mongering around Donald Trump, the way you set it up, is the way Noam Chomsky would set it up. These really smart people who ought to know better that Donald Trump isn't responsible for all our problems, and that even though he's inept,
he's not responsible for all of our problems, Alan, but a corrupt, evil liberal bureaucracy, a cold-hearted liberal bureaucracy of the lowest order, would still send safety guidelines to schools so that children don't go into them and come out with the goddamn coronavirus. They would. Let's just not pretend that they wouldn't. Now, that is not, once again, I am not saying I agree with their decision. I am saying that I respect their decision if and only if they are willing to get out in the streets and make this popular uprising happen. That is my position.
Okay, but do you really think that people who believe, because the reason we have Donald Trump is because of the last 40 years of neoliberalism. So if they vote for Biden, if they're misinformed enough, in my opinion, to vote for Biden, misguided enough, they're going to get Ted Nugent after that. They're going to get somebody even worse than Trump. So if they're really that afraid of Donald Trump, then probably the worst thing they could do is vote for somebody Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton would endorse, because they're much more evil in my book than Donald Trump ever could be.
Okay, so what is then your vision of the future? If you're going to tell people how to vote, then I think you owe it to them to tell them how things are going to work out based on that vote or non-vote.
I'd
right?
say
now, I don't have that vision of the future.
I've got an answer.
That's why I'm not telling people how to vote, because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. I honestly don't.
I think I can answer that.
Go ahead.
I think that when you look at the last 40 years, you can't project it into the future because weird things happen. But I'd say that if you see why people are so desperate now, it's not because of Donald Trump. It's mostly because Maggie Thatcher and Captain Ronnie Reagan that people are so desperate. So if you think about it in terms of what actually causes the desperation, then you have to say the reason we are in the horrible place we're in now is because of lesser evilism voting. If you wake up and see that lesser evilism is why we have Trump, then you have to say we have to stop doing this. If we're awake at all, if we're paying attention and we're not just being hypnotized by the mainstream media, we have to admit that the only way out of this, if there is a way out by voting, is to stop voting for either right-wing party, which is all really the same.
But now you're going back on your premise, man. There is no way out in voting because there's no one to vote for.
Okay, but
whoever wins this election is going to be an unbelievably horrible president who is not equipped in any way, shape, or form to meet this moment. We both agree on that. And so if the election is lost, what I am saying is, and you also keep coming back to this idea that we're somehow making a deal with Joe Biden by voting for him. Let's take the lesser evil thing out. Let's take that whole public school thing out. Let's take the safety guidelines out, right? If that's not a convincing point to you, then we don't have to go there. Okay. And by the way, it's not a totally convincing point to me. I haven't heard Joe Biden's plan on how he's going to reopen schools. Joe Biden has rejected a UBI until there's a vaccine, which is something his own vice president now, as horrible as she is, she signed on for a UBI and he won't even do that. Yeah. Now they're saying now the Dems are saying they're going to not push a public option right away, right after Joe Biden wins, right? So it's falling apart. So I'm not telling people, like I said, and you know this about me, I don't have to say this again. I'm not telling people to vote for Joe Biden at all. I would never say that to anybody, because even when it comes to these very real concerns, I don't know what Joe Biden's plan is to safely reopen schools. Joe Biden has already backtracked on the less than a bare minimum. Medicare for all is a bare minimum when it comes to healthcare policy. He's backtracked off of something that is not even close to the bare minimum. So he's way in nowheresville on that issue. All right. And so let's just take that out. Let's just say, listen, if someone says they're going to vote for Joe Biden because they think that he is more likely to, once again, I'll do the Braveheart analogy one more time, he's more likely to kiss that ring when we make clear to him that society won't function unless we get Medicare for all debt forgiveness, all these policies, then this psychopathic Republican Party that just has an overt death drive, they will just let it crumble. It's very obvious they will just let it go to hell, right?
I've got one for that too. I don't think I'd say corporate Joe is less likely. Donald Trump has actually been clearly to his left on a few issues, including UBI, including the continuation of the unemployment insurance.
I don't really buy that.
I would say now maybe we should get people to comment and get our best thinkers to do, Russell, for example, to say which is more likely. But you could make the case that Joe, over the years, is absolutely not likely, because if he did kiss the ring, like you say, and get the Medicare for all, it would give workers so much more power to strike when their health insurance is not connected to their job, and somebody says, "Hey guys, you're going to keep having to deliver Uber Eats, or you're going to have to keep working in Jeff Bezos' sweat factories." They say, no, we're going to go on strike because we know that we don't have to pay COBRA payments for our health insurance. We know we still are going to have health insurance. That's why corporate Joe, deep state Joe, CIA, military, and intelligence complex Joe would be less likely, because he's connected to all of the horrible Hollywood, everything evil. I don't think the CIA would even take an order from him. I think they'd be much more willing to take an order from Barack Obama right now than from Donald Trump, truth be told. So I'd say you could make the case that because of Joe's obvious at-the-hip connection to the deep state, he'd be even less likely than Donald Trump to ever give workers the power that they would get from having Medicare for all, and also a federal jobs guarantee.
Do you believe that Donald Trump is more likely to sign off on Medicare for all under public pressure than Joe Biden is?
I'd say, I'm not an expert, but even an expert, even somebody who knew everything about Trump, everything about Biden, everything about the deep state, who knew all the secrets, I'd say even for an expert like that, it would be difficult to say one way or the other. But I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's any better to say that we're sure that Joe would be more likely to kiss that ring.
That's not what I said.
I don't think that they're equally likely to kiss. I'd say that they're equally unlikely to kiss the ring. I wouldn't put one ahead of the other.
Okay, so if you wouldn't put one ahead of the other, then why are you making such a huge deal over people who say they're going to vote for one over the other? I don't understand.
Because, as I said a minute ago, the last 40 years of neoliberalism is why we have Trump. We need to wake up and figure out that we can't, for principle's sake, vote for corporatists. Nobody who calls themselves a progressive is in this progressive coalition.
So then what is the vision of the future? Like I said,
we don't want Ted Nugent. We don't want Ted Nugent next. We don't want Tom Cotton. We don't want the person. The backlash. We'd have a huge backlash against, all the young people that are so pissed off, all the ones you just described, because Barack Obama failed us and then took away Bernie Sanders, and all the rednecks, all of the Hillary's basket of deplorables. All of them,
yes. Interesting.
They too would rise up.
They too would rise up, not against Donald Trump. They're not going to rise up against Donald Trump.
No, they're going to rise up against Joe Biden.
They're going to rise up against Joe Biden. And guess who's also going to rise up against Joe Biden? Us. Joe Biden unites the populist opposition to the political establishment. Donald Trump splits the populist
opposition. Okay, I remember you made this point before. I remember this point. So then we would unite the Rust Belt people with the inner city people, and then
that's going to take a little bit of massaging, right? You're going to need a few people like me who are a little bit more diplomatic than you are in order to make that happen. But yes,
I don't have an answer to that one. That's actually a pretty good argument. I don't really have a rebuttal to that one. that we would be more likely to get that coalition started after a Biden. And it's not a Biden presidency. Nobody on the inside on the DNC thinks it's a Biden. They think
Of course it's not.
It's
Dude,
a Kamala.
listen.
It's a Harris presidency. They've picked her to be the president, and he's going to step down within a year, maybe. And
You're going to
she's gonna
have,
be the
if Joe
president.
Biden wins, because Donald Trump is already trying to undermine the legitimacy of the results. If Joe Biden wins this race, you're going to have those redneck types that you talked about out in the streets on day one saying he is an illegitimate president. Yep. And you know what? They're right. He is an illegitimate president because he was the illegitimate nominee of an illegitimate political party called the Democratic Party. So they're right. So you know who's going to be out there protesting with them? Us. We are. Yeah. Not the wine track left. They're going to be at brunch. Fine. Yeah. Let them have their French toast, whatever the fuck. We're going to be out there with the populist right saying this is an illegitimate government. Mm-hmm. That is how you grow a populist movement. You cannot grow a populist movement when you have the populist opposition to the political establishment split because there is this casino grease-painted freak of a con man in there who has half the populist movement convinced that he's working for them when we know that he's not. Right. And so that is why I am saying not to vote for Joe Biden, but to give people space to make that decision. Because what we need is the populist movement after the election. That's not to say we can't have an opinion on it. It's to say that we can't make people feel like they are unwelcome in a left movement based on their decision on how to vote. That's really my point.
The best argument you made was the idea that if Biden gets in, that we'll have a better chance of rising up and not getting Ted Nugent next time. I think a lot of the truck driver people I rub shoulders with are waking up to the idea that Donald Trump was a fraud. So there are people on the right, there are white people, blue-collar people on the right, and I live in Pennsylvania, I live in the Rust Belt, who understand that Donald Trump
You live in a swing state. Your vote is extremely important. Have I ever asked you to vote for Joe Biden once?
Yeah, no. There are people who say, though, you and Russell, that it's less likely. Like you said, you think about it for all of 5 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, and then you say absolutely not voting for Biden. Those of us whose votes actually matter, I think we all also ought to do that. But again, your best argument is that if Biden gets in, it's Kamala getting in, and so hopefully the rising up that you're describing would happen just as strongly against Kamala as it would against corporate Joe.
Of course
we don't know all this stuff.
You think the people in that photo behind you are fooled by Kamala Harris? I don't.
I don't think the young people are. It's hard to say. And, you're making a pretty
I know it's hard to say,
point,
man.
But we still.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's still hard to say that that's going to happen. But what I want to do, I want to slap the comfy people so hard.
So do I.
That they just give up. I just want when shit starts happening and cars start getting turned over and things get burned up, I wish a lot of the pain should be to these people who voted for Joe Biden after Super Tuesday.
Yes, and it will be if Joe Biden is elected president and the populist opposition unites against him. If Donald Trump is elected president, these people are in the same position that they are now, except some of them are afraid to send their kids to school. But they're in the same position they are now. That's why the resistance to Donald Trump from the, MSNBC crowd has been so fake. It's been Russia. It's been his tax returns, right? It's been, you know the whole laundry list. The way you're going to get a real opposition to the political establishment is to unite the populists. The way to unite the populists is to have a new world order shill like Joe Biden in the Oval Office. You are not going to do that with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And that is why I said, Alan, that in New York, it's a no-brainer. I would never vote for Joe Biden, not even think about it for more than a second in New York, because my vote is meaningless. In Pennsylvania, I would have to weigh my contempt for the Democrats, my solidarity with these people who are drowning in debt I would have to weigh that against the strategic decision of, hey, if Joe Biden becomes president, we're going to have the populist right out in the streets on day one. And if the populist left joins them, that's how we really make life uncomfortable for the upper middle class wine track Democrats who just want to go back to brunch.
Okay,
By sitting down
good.
and re-electing Donald Trump, we're not actually hurting them. We're making them upset on election night, right? And I'm not, listen, I'm not a Christ-like figure. I'm not, right, I know, I see you smiling right there. I'm not saying that I wouldn't take some momentary pleasure, right, in their emotional, wreckage on that night. But a few months later, man, what's going to happen? They're going to get on the train. They're going to put a pussy hat on. They're going to march. They're going to feel good about themselves. And they're going to go back to their comfortable lives because the populist opposition to this government is going to remain split. And in 4 years, what are we going to get? We already tested this theory of, because we thought, there was some reason to maybe believe that in 2016, that if Trump wins, we're going to have a renewed sort of left consciousness take shape in this country, and we're gonna get a guy like Bernie 4 years later.
We almost did. We were close.
We were very close, but we've realized that we just couldn't make that happen for a variety of reasons. It's a mixture of Democratic Party fuckery, like I said, and Democratic voter stupidity. When you have people terrified of Trump, that's how MSNBC, why do you think MSNBC's ratings have shot up during the Trump years? Because people are looking for guidance, and that's a corporate media outlet that's going to steer. That's why I called them controlled opposition. They're going to steer any opposition to Trump in such a way that it does not threaten corporate power. And right. The Democrats are either too stupid to see through that, or they're in on it, right? The professional managerial class is they're on the take. Yep. So electorally, what's going to happen in 4 years? What's that?
Their gig flow isn't going to, flow is going to be better.
So what's going to happen? So I cannot articulate for someone a vision of the future in which letting Donald Trump get reelected is going to help the left in any way. I just can't. If you want to make an argument, I'm going to give you an argument here. If you want to say that, look, the social contract has been broken to the point where it's basically irreparable, right? Capitalism has been exposed for the house of cards that it is, right? We have unprecedented levels of economic devastation. We have people getting evicted, right? We have businesses closing left and right. 60% of restaurants are closing, according to Yelp. Yelp just put out that 60% of their restaurants are emailing them saying, take our page down, we're done. That means waitresses, busboys, out of business. This means tourism is shot. New York City is a wasteland now, right? If you want to make the argument that this country is so far gone that we cannot reverse course before it hits rock bottom, that we have to let it all go to hell and hopefully build something new in its wake, and that Joe Biden is only going to be any sort of adjustment that Biden-Harris makes is only going to be some neoliberal con job that just slows the bleeding ever so slightly but keeps us on this road to hell, and that we have to hit rock bottom before we could rebound anyway, and that Donald Trump is somehow going to accelerate that. And if you want to make that argument for Donald Trump, that's quite a depressing argument. But you know what? I don't know I could argue against that. I really don't. I don't know that this country can be salvaged right now before it crashes and burns. Yeah. I don't. So if you want to make that argument, make that argument. And I understand the validity of that argument, which is why, once again, for the 1,000,001th time, I am not telling people how to vote, because I don't know. I cannot articulate a vision of the future either way that I feel confident enough to tell people, hey, when you go in that booth, you better do this or you better not do this. I don't know that. What I know is that the only way to save this country, whether it is before we hit rock bottom or after, is mass movements, direct action, labor strikes, sit-ins, teach-ins, marches, right? Disrupting the society to the point where it simply must change.
Maybe the only reason I would keep going in my path is just to slap the comfy people as much as possible, which is sort of vindictive. The other question I have is, what do you think would happen if within 6 months Biden had an aneurysm or dropped out for his own reasons and we kept going with Kamala? What would happen after 3.5 years then in your post-apocalyptic vision?
Well, unless there is a popular uprising that is big enough and strong enough and brave enough, then things are going to continue to get worse. That's true whether Biden lasts the 4 years. That's true whether Trump gets reelected or not. That's true whether Harris takes over on day one. I mean, that's true in any circumstance. Yeah. That's it. That's the only hope there is. That's what I need. I need people to understand. The only hope is in these mass movements. You quote Chris Hedges quite often.
Yeah.
Well, Chris Hedges, I'm sure you know that Chris Hedges is very skeptical of electoral politics for exactly this reason. And this is the danger of something like a Bernie Sanders campaign. As much as I supported the campaign and you supported the campaign, the danger of mass movements funneling themselves through electoral campaigns is that they are not able to adjust their strategies once these electoral campaigns don't go their way.
Yep.
Right? They keep doubling down on the idea that we can somehow vote or not vote or protest vote our way out of this.
Yeah.
And we can't.
Yep.
That's what people need to understand. We can't.
Yep.
Now, that's not to say that electing Bernie wasn't a huge once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but think about it. The reason that was such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity is because Bernie Sanders not only has the right policies, but Bernie Sanders comes from the school of thought of political action. Right? Bernie Sanders is a combination of a politician with good policies and an activist. He cut his teeth in the streets. He cut his teeth doing civil rights protests, right? And so that's what made that a unique opportunity. Once that is off the table, we have to get rid of this idea that this election is somehow meaningful. It is ultimately not. This is a sham of election. You're a George Carlin fan. George Carlin is a hero of mine. What did he say? These elections are a charade. They are meant to give people the illusion of choice. You don't have real choices when you have these kinds of candidates being funneled through, sometimes in legitimate ways, like Donald Trump won that election, with popular support. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton won their nominations in illegitimate ways. But at the end of the day, there's no real choices here. The only choice we have is to act or not act, no matter who the president is. Anybody who's willing to act is welcome to act. And my concern is that if we start calling people scabs and start calling people sheepdogs and calling people liars and phonies and sellouts.
Cowards.
What's that?
And cowards.
And cowards, right. Just because they vote, even if they're willing to go out and do the kind of stuff that we both agree needs to be done, that's going to discourage them from doing so. And so whether it's, and you say it's a small percentage of people, yeah, it is a small percentage of people. 88% of Bernie supporters are going to vote for Joe Biden. We don't have numbers right now. That's the point. We need numbers in order to make this happen. And which means we need everybody on the left, even if it is a small number of people who I'm talking about, who are sincere leftists, who are thinking about voting for Joe Biden for purely utilitarian motives. We need them. And we also need these populist right wingers who are going to be out there calling Joe Biden a fraud of a president on day one. And what's going to happen? All the resistance libs are going to say, oh, do you believe these white trash are out there calling him a fraud of a president? And I'm going to be like, no, he is a fraud of a president. Not because of voter fraud, right? Not for that reason. His presidency is illegitimate because his nomination was illegitimate.
Yep.
And we rally the troops around that, and we apply maximum pressure, unrelenting pressure to this system, not to Joe Biden, not to Kamala Harris. Forget about them. It's about applying maximum pressure to the system. And if we can do that, there is hope. If we cannot do that, there is no hope. And we need all hands on deck, no matter who votes for what. There was this guy, this schmuck on Facebook the other day. I'll read it because you chimed in on this conversation and you chimed in and plugged my article, which good on you. But anyway, this guy, I won't use last names because I don't want to shame anybody here. This guy, Robert, posts in the Bernie or Bust forum. Just out of curiosity, if you're writing in Bernie on the ballot in November like me, who are you planning on writing in for VP? Billy responds, I'll write in Elizabeth Warren. Jared responds to Billy, that sellout that helped the DNC screw Bernie? Billy says, "Yep, Jared, that's the sellout I'm writing in. Who are you writing in, Jared?" Chris chimes in, good question. Vic says, "Nina Turner." She got 2 likes on that. Beth says, "I'm writing in Tulsi." That got a like. Robert, the author of the post, says, "Thank you, everyone. I don't have a VP pick yet, so I wanted to get some ideas about how other people here felt." This is a waste of fucking time. I don't care. Who do you write in for VP? Write in your dick for VP for all I care. It doesn't matter. Time spent doing this bullshit on Bernie or Bust forums could be time spent organizing a nurses strike, a rent strike, a student walkout, right? We have to let go of the idea that it matters who these dipshits write in for vice president on election day.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
For Christ's sake.
All right, we agreed on that last time, but we can't afford to keep making pragmatic compromises with the comfy crowd.
Not the comfy crowd. This is not a comfy crowd. It's a Bernie or Bust here.
No, but
I'm not talking about comfy crowd.
80 whatever percent of the assholes. I'm sorry, but Bernie people don't get a pass here. If they're going to vote for Joe Biden, 80 whatever percent you said, that's discouraging. And if we are trying to say going forward, if we're getting people out in the streets and we're getting people to stand up for what's right and actually do something that matters, have a strike or whatever, I don't think going forward we're going to be in any better place than we are now if we the comfy people piss me off so much, and so somewhat I'm just being vindictive, but the reason the DNC is what it is. I appreciate
your honesty in that, but
yeah,
yes.
But the DNC is what it is now because they used to be a populist party. And so this is a slippery slope I don't think we can afford to step onto. I don't think in our radio shows, in our TV shows, the independent left, I don't think we can afford to pander. And I think Vosh, I think he's pandering, and I think Cenk is pandering, and I don't think you're pandering. And you've made that clear. You've quitted yourself well here in making the case that your intentions are good, and you're absolutely right that the main thing we need to do is protest and strike and start shit. But I still think that we all are trying to build coalitions, even if it's just our audience that listens to us and watches us and hears us and reads us. But even so, we'll all be in trouble because Jimmy Dore isn't wrong when he says that all of the lefty pundits have sold out to some extent. He's not wrong. You really have to look to find somebody who hasn't bent the knee. If you look at Norman Solomon, you look at Noam Chomsky, you look at David Dole, they've sold out, and the way is because they don't. Even Kyle Kulinski won't come out and say that it's wrong to vote for Joe Biden in a swing state. To me, if you can say that, then you're pure. Then you've got real credibility. And the people who make any kind of argument, I don't know why they're making these arguments. I don't know their tax returns. I can't see. Some people may be making them for good reasons.
Let's stop talking about Kyle Kulinski and Cenk Uygur and David Dole. You know why I'm making the argument, right?
Okay, it's fine to let you off the hook. Fine, you're off the hook. Great, you're off the hook. I don't, we don't need to talk about
being off the hook.
But I don't want them to be off the hook. I'd say they are sheepdogs, and a sheepdog is not somebody I can condone. And I think it's important for the listeners to understand that some of these sheepdogs are sheepdogs because they're getting paid by the DNC, by operatives within the DNC. I think people need to wake up and stop consuming MSM, mainstream media, of course. I think they need to stop consuming Vosh. I think they need to stop consuming David Dole. I think it matters. The biggest problem we had at Super Tuesday was people being informed by mainstream media. So if the lefty pundits can't get their act together, we're no better off.
Okay, all right. So look, I mean, okay, fine. If you're suggesting that there may be some of these independent media people who are not as independent as they say they are, who have ulterior motives for being soft on the issue of voting for Joe Biden. Okay, fine. this once again is not number one on my list of things to care about right now, whether Kyle Kalinske is on the take. To me, the far more important, I mean, there will be time to talk about that if you feel strongly about that. But right now, what needs to be happening in all these Bernie forums, especially the Bernie or Bust forums, is we need to be organizing, not masturbating about who we're going to write in on the vice president.
All right. You've made that point enough times, and you're right. But it does matter where we get our news. One of the most important reason that we don't have Bernie is because of where people get their news.
That's absolutely 100%
okay. So
correct.
We've got to get this straight. Where should people get their news? And we have a very narrow. If you're looking at the purity test, and you need to with pundits, you need to with politicians, but you also need to with pundits. If we can't find a reliable group, I would say Max Blumenthal. I would say there are a couple, and obviously Chris Hedges, but there are very few people that we can really trust that aren't giving us some corporate spin. And I think we need to get that sorted out. I think that the readers and the viewers and the listeners really need to know where are the absolutely solid places to get their news. And there are a lot of places that are squishy, and we need to make sure we keep on top of that. You and I both, I think we owe it to our viewers and listeners and readers to make sure they know that there aren't very many places that they can really trust with their information gathering.
No, I agree with you. I think everybody who watches the Young Turks and Vosh and Kyle Kalinske and David Dole should start listening to Do Dissidence and watching the Howl Underground.
There we go.
100% on that. I'm with you on that. But what I'm, I mean, I think we've basically made our points here. But I just want to ask, because, you follow Hedges very, very closely. Yeah. I read his stuff when it comes out. I follow Max Blumenthal less closely, although I do know him. He does a podcast with Ben Norton that is pretty good. Are they, like, the people who you consider the real deal, and I would tend to say that they are as well, though I'm less familiar with them than you are they out there harping on who people should vote for? I don't think so. I haven't heard. I suspect they're not.
One person I used to like more than I do now is Aaron Mate, and he's definitely not. And Crystal Ball also I used to like more than I do now, and she's not. She actually went along quite readily with Noam Chomsky's and Norm Solomon's recent fiasco. So yeah, but the people who, Chris Hedges. Let's just use Chris Hedges. Okay, he is golden. So let's use him as the model for everyone else to follow. He doesn't compromise. And he said,
sorry, go ahead.
He said that Howie Hawkins is good. He endorses Howie Hawkins. And even though I think Howie Hawkins is a little more imperialistic than I would like, I would definitely endorse him based on his domestic policies. But if you're gonna say who are these good journalists that we can ultimately trust, you can put them on one hand.
Okay, gotcha. So you just said you're endorsing Howie Hawkins, right? If you're endorsing a candidate, then fine. It's fine to endorse a candidate. I don't fault people for endorsing candidates. What I think is too mixed a message and too counterproductive is when you don't endorse a candidate. Like, if you don't have an electoral strategy, if you say, look, I think people should vote for Howie Hawkins because I think we need to get a third party that is robust and viable that can challenge this two-party system. Therefore, I think people should vote for Howie Hawkins. In blue states, in red states, in swing states, fine. That's totally legitimate. And I don't mean to say that what you're doing is not legitimate, but I think it is. I think if that's your position, just as a viewer who watches every episode of yours, start talking about that more, because people don't know where you're leading them when your only message is don't vote for Joe Biden. If you're only saying don't vote for Biden, people don't know what your vision of the future is. They don't know what road you're leading them down. If you're going to tell them how to act in a voting booth, you have to give them a vision of reality that they can get behind. And so if you're going to vote for Hawkins and you think other people should do that, then fine, endorse Howie Hawkins.
You are allowed, and we do have an obligation to say what not to do. And so the false framing.
I'm not saying you're not allowed to do it. I'm just saying it's confusing people.
With Vosh, he would say, "Okay, do you agree or not that Joe Biden is less evil than Donald Trump? Yes or no? Answer right now." And you'd be like, I don't know what to do. Have I stopped beating my wife yet? Yes or no? Have I stopped beating my wife yet? And that kind of framing sucks. And the framing that corporatists pose on us is, you have to vote for one or the other. This is reality. You have to vote for one or the other of the racist rapists. You have to. And that's not real. And so,
of course it's not.
So
no.
If we aren't able to call that out, okay, you say positive, lead in a positive direction, vote for Howie Hawkins and be positive. But I also reserve the right to call people out for their false framing, their twisted framing, their corporate framing. And I reserve the right to keep picking on all the lack of justice, on all the lack of being upfront and being honest. I want to keep telling my people who not to trust. I think it's important to keep doing that. I don't want to be hamstrung. I don't want to be handcuffed into saying this is where I want you to go, and not to ever be able to say this is where you should not under any circumstances go. I feel like as an antagonist, as a person who's always, taking the opposite side of things, I need to be able to keep saying, don't go here. Don't listen to this guy. Don't watch this show. And I will keep doing that.
Okay, sure. No, that's fine. And it's fine to say don't vote for Joe Biden if you're offering people a vision of the future that they can get behind, that will result from that choice. And I just think, I'm not saying you have to convert your show into a Hawkins campaign show, but I'm just saying mentioning that is going to, I'm just giving you viewer feedback here, right? You do with what you want. It's your show. It's a great show. Like I said, I listen to every episode. All right. But what I'm saying is that that's going to give people a clearer sense of how you want the future to look. Because if it just looks like we're sabotaging Joe Biden for vindictive purposes, the way you said, right, then people are going to think, well, you're just doing this to get an emotional high on election night when all the liberals cry because Donald Trump wins and Joe Biden loses. And believe me, brother, I'm going to have my barf bag ready on election night when that happens, because these people are insufferable. They're villainous, most of them. Most of these upper middle class Democratic Party voters, and of course the pundits and the politicians, that's a whole new level of evil, right? But what I'm saying is that if we want to have the last laugh, because they were upset on election night in 2016, but who had the last laugh? They did. Because Donald Trump did not disrupt their lives. There was no viable, robust, no bullshit left opposition to Donald Trump. All the right-wing populists were under the spell of Donald Trump, who is basically conning them. And most of what we consider the left was out doing women's marches and Russiagate marches. And so who has the last laugh in that situation? The professional managerial class Democrats. Who's going to have the last laugh when the populists are out with the pitchforks on day one saying Joe Biden stole the presidency, and the populist left is out there saying, yeah, you're right, he did steal the presidency, not in the way you think he did, but whatever, we don't have to parse that. We're here, we're against Joe Biden, we have arrived. That is where we will have the last laugh. And so that's my piece, right? And do I feel confident enough in that to tell people go and vote for Joe Biden? Of course not. Of course not. And I understand completely all the reasons, like I laid out in that extended sort of monologue I went on a little while ago, why they wouldn't. But that's where I'm coming from here. Where I'm coming from here is let's build a populist movement. I'm a left guy, but, some of these rednecks want to bring their pitchforks out and scream about how Joe Biden, basically stole the office. That's fine. You come on. I don't care. That's where I'm willing to go. I'm saying even if you're a Trump voter, I'm willing to let you into the coalition.
Good. Me too. If you're a militia from Idaho or Oregon, and you say defund the police.
Whoever voted for whoever, I don't care. We need a big movement that is ready to rumble. Yeah. And if we don't have that, the country is fucked. Yeah. Doesn't matter who wins the goddamn presidency. If we don't have this thing up and running and ready to go, then it doesn't mean anything.
Time to fuck shit up.
Here we go. All right, I think we can end on that. But how do you feel about that?
Fuck shit up. That's a good ending. If we
All
can
right,
agree
there
to
we go.
fuck shit up, and that's what we're after, good. So let's stir everybody up and do just that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alan. It's always great to talk to you. We can do this anytime.
Yeah, I like doing this.
You can follow us on Facebook, like us on SoundCloud, subscribe to this podcast on any major podcast player, sign up at patreon.com. We have a very grubby, populist-friendly tier for $3 a month. If you want to support us on that platform, you can do that. And that's about, go to the website, read the blogs. Once again, check out the Howl Underground on YouTube and Revolution or Bust on any podcast player. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your support. We'll see you next time.